Welcome back to True Crime Whispers, where we explore the most haunting and mysterious cases that leave us questioning the boundaries of the human mind. Tonight, we uncover a chilling case that forces us to ask, what happens when a mind turns against itself, and loved ones pay the ultimate price? In 2004, a young man named Andre Thomas, once a promising student, descended into a world of mental torment that no one could have imagined. His struggles with religion, delusions, and the devastating grip of untreated mental illness would end in a horrific tragedy, a crime so shocking that it still echoes through the corridors of justice today. Was this an act of pure evil or the tragic result of a deeply fractured mind? And should a man who mutilated himself in the name of his beliefs face execution for his actions? Stay with us as we unravel the disturbing events of that fateful March day and examine the life of a man forever marked by madness and murder. It was in the early 2000s when small-town life in Texas still had a sense of familiarity. Grayson County, nestled in the heart of the state, was no different. It was where neighbors waved from their porches, families gathered for Sunday dinners, and the streets grew silent after dark. But behind the warm glow of this quiet town lay struggles that no one spoke of openly. Mental health was a topic shrouded in misunderstanding. For many, help felt out of reach. This silence would set the stage for an unimaginable tragedy, forever shattering this community's sense of safety. Andre Thomas grew up in Sherman, Texas, a bright child with an inquisitive mind. Teachers saw his potential early on, inviting him to join the school's gifted and talented program. He had dreams and a promising future, but cracks beneath the surface grew wider as he aged. Andre was drawn to the Bible from a young age, particularly the darker, more apocalyptic verses. As time passed, his fascination grew into an obsession, one that fed the delusions beginning to take hold of his mind. He often spoke of battling demons and believed he was living out a prophecy written in the pages of Revelation. Laura Thomas, Andre's estranged wife, was just 20 years old but had already experienced more heartache than most face in a lifetime. Despite their separation, she worked tirelessly to provide a safe home for their 4-year-old son, Andre Lee, and her 13-month-old daughter, Leah Marie Hughes. Laura had moved on from Andre, finding love again with Bryant Hughes, the father of little Leah. By all accounts, Laura was a devoted mother and a kind soul. Her children were her world, and she did everything possible to ensure their happiness. But her story, and that of her young family, would take a turn so dark that it still haunts Grayson County to this day. Andre's erratic behavior began to raise concern among those closest to him. His girlfriend, Carmen Hayes, noticed troubling changes. He spoke of demons and described Laura as Jezebel, a figure of wickedness from the Bible. He was convinced that their son, Andre Lee, was the Antichrist and that baby Leah was a manifestation of pure evil. In the days leading up to the tragedy, Andre's cries for help grew louder. He walked into a hospital after stabbing himself, claiming he needed to cross over into heaven. An emergency detention order was filed, but it was never executed. Andre slipped away, unnoticed, back into the shadows. 2 days later, those shadows would consume an innocent family. There were warnings, missed opportunities to intervene. But no one could have imagined the horrors unfolding inside Laura's home that March morning. The signs were there, but hindsight would come too late. Little did anyone know, the final chapter of Laura, Andre Lee, and Leah's story was already being written, not in ink, but in blood. In the days before March 27, 2004, there were signs that something was wrong. Andre Thomas had become increasingly erratic. Those closest to him watched as he spiraled deeper into his delusions. He spoke of demons lurking in plain sight and needing to stop an evil force he believed was growing around him. Andre's obsession with religious imagery had grown to an unbearable intensity. He told his girlfriend, Carmen Hayes, and his cousin, Isaiah Gibbs, that Laura, his estranged wife, was Jezebel, a figure of wickedness. He believed their son, Andre Lee, was the Antichrist and that Leah, Laura's baby daughter, was a vessel of pure evil. On the morning of March 27, Andre Thomas went to Laura's home. Inside were Laura, her 4-year-old son, Andre Lee, and her 13-month-old daughter, Leah. Andre brought his growing rage and a collection of knives, each chosen for a specific purpose. What happened next would forever alter the lives of everyone who knew this young family. Andre broke into the house and confronted Laura. What began as an argument quickly turned into an act of unthinkable violence. In a fit of rage, Andre used one of the knives to stab Laura repeatedly in the chest. The force of the attack was so brutal it pierced through her ribs. But Andre wasn't finished. He turned his attention to the children. Andre Lee and baby Leah never stood a chance. He used different knives for each of them, claiming it was to avoid cross-contaminating their blood and releasing the demons he believed lived inside them. Andre's delusions guided his every move. He cut out Laura's lung, mistaking it for her heart, and removed the hearts of both children. The organs, he believed, were the source of their evil. Beside their lifeless bodies, Andre left a folded dollar bill, a symbol he had become fixated on in the weeks leading up to the murders. He believed the eye in the pyramid represented an evil force watching him. After the murders, Andre turned the knife on himself, stabbing his chest in an attempt to end his own life. When he realized he had survived, he gathered the children's organs, placed them in his pocket, and walked home. Back at his apartment, Andre calmly placed the knives in the sink, changed his clothes, and made a phone call. The message he left on Laura's parents' voicemail was chilling. In a desperate voice, he begged for help, claiming he was in hell and didn't know what was happening to him. When authorities arrived at the scene, they were met with horror. Even seasoned officers struggled to comprehend the sheer brutality of what they found. Laura and her children were gone, their lives stolen in a moment of madness. Neighbors stood in stunned silence, struggling to process the news. "It's like something out of a nightmare," one said as tears streamed down her face. The tight-knit community of Sherman, Texas, would never be the same. Andre walked into the police station that same day and confessed to everything. He showed no remorse, only confusion, as if he couldn't believe what he had done. What drove Andre Thomas to commit such an unspeakable act? Was it a calculated crime or the result of a mind lost to madness? These questions would soon be asked in a courtroom, but for the families affected, the answers could never bring back what was lost. When officers arrived at Laura Thomas's home, they faced a scene that would haunt them for the rest of their lives. What they found was not just a crime, it was a nightmare. The brutality left even the most seasoned detectives shaken. But amid the horror, there were clues. Investigators quickly realized that every detail was key to understanding what had happened that fateful day. The investigation began with methodical precision. Forensic teams combed through the house, documenting every bloodstain, every misplaced object, and every trace of evidence. They noted the knives left in the sink, the folded dollar bill near the bodies, and the unsettling placement of the victims. To detectives, these weren't random acts, they told a story. The folded dollar bill was particularly disturbing. Andre Thomas's fixation on the symbol had been a growing obsession, one that fueled his delusions. Investigators began to unravel the psychological threads behind his actions, but first, they had to track him down. They didn't have to look far. Just hours after the murders, Andre Thomas walked into the Sherman Police Department and confessed. He recounted the details of what he had done with a calmness that sent chills through the officers listening. But his confession wasn't enough. Detectives needed to piece together the events leading up to the crime to understand his motives and mindset. They began speaking with friends, family, and anyone who had interacted with Andre in the weeks prior. What they uncovered was a disturbing portrait of a man unraveling. Friends described Andre's increasing paranoia, his erratic behavior, and his obsession with religious imagery. He had been quoting scripture, covering his mouth with duct tape to silence the devil, and insisting that demons were watching him. It was clear that Andre's mental health had been spiraling for weeks, perhaps even years. Hospital records revealed another chilling detail. Just days before the murders, Andrei had been in the emergency room after stabbing himself. He told medical staff he was trying to cross into heaven. They filed an emergency detention order to hold him for psychiatric evaluation, but before the paperwork could be signed, Andrei walked out. No one stopped him, and no one followed up. It was a missed opportunity, one that would soon lead to tragedy. Investigators began to piece together Andrei's state of mind with this new information. But as they looked deeper, they found more troubling signs. Family members recalled his erratic behavior during childhood, suicide attempts, strange outbursts, and an inability to cope with stress. His mother, who had largely been absent from his life, told officers she had long suspected Andrei had a mental illness but had never sought help for him. The physical evidence was equally telling. Each knife Andrei used had been carefully selected for a specific purpose. The precision and thought behind his actions indicated that, despite his mental state, this was not a spur-of-the-moment act. He believed he was carrying out a mission to eliminate what he thought was evil. Then came the discovery of Andrei's writings. In his diary, investigators found pages filled with cryptic symbols, references to demons, and chilling entries describing his plans. One passage read, "I must stop them before they destroy us all." The writings provided a harrowing glimpse into the mind of a man consumed by delusions. As word of the crime spread, the community struggled to comprehend what had happened. Neighbors described Andrei as quiet but polite, someone they would never have suspected of such violence. Others, however, mentioned his recent strange behavior, his fixation on the Book of Revelation and increasingly disjointed conversations. Detectives faced a daunting task. The evidence was overwhelming, but the complexity of Andrei's mental state raised serious questions. Was he fully aware of his actions? Did he understand the consequences? These were questions the justice system would soon have to address. The investigation was far from over. As detectives dug deeper, they uncovered more unsettling details that would challenge the boundaries between guilt, insanity, and justice. For now, one thing was clear: the small town of Sherman, Texas, would never forget the horror that unfolded within its borders. The trial of Andrei Thomas began under a shadow of horror and disbelief. The courtroom was filled with family members, reporters, and spectators seeking answers. Andrei, now blind from self-inflicted injuries, sat silently as the prosecution and defense prepared to argue his fate. Prosecutors painted a vivid picture of the brutal murders. They described the injuries Laura and her children had endured and the gruesome actions Andrei had taken after their deaths. The lead prosecutor called the crime one of the most shocking in Texas history and argued that Andrei's actions were calculated, not the result of insanity. This was no momentary lapse, the prosecutor stated. Andrei Thomas made choices. He chose to enter that house. He chose to arm himself with knives. He chose to end the lives of his family in the most horrific way imaginable. The prosecution demanded the ultimate punishment, death. But the defense team had a different story to tell. They described Andrei's long history of mental illness, stretching back to his childhood. They pointed to suicide attempts, hallucinations, and delusions as evidence that he was not in control of his actions. Psychiatric experts testified that Andrei believed he was acting on divine instructions, driven by an unrelenting voice in his head. Doctors detailed Andrei's descent into madness. They explained how untreated schizophrenia can cause individuals to lose touch with reality, leading to delusions and extreme behavior. One expert described Andrei as a deeply troubled man whose mind betrayed him at every turn. Laura's family listened with heavy hearts, their pain palpable. During victim impact statements, her father stood and addressed the court, calling Andrei monster, while also expressing frustration at a system that had failed to intervene before tragedy struck. "We begged for help," he said, his voice breaking. But no one listened. The trial captivated the public, with opinions divided. Some saw Andrei as a cold-blooded killer who deserved no mercy, while others viewed him as a tragic figure abandoned by a society that failed to provide adequate mental health care. The media coverage was relentless, fueling debates about justice, mental illness, and the death penalty. After weeks of testimony and emotional arguments, the jury deliberated. It took them just 45 minutes to reach a verdict. Andre Thomas was found guilty of capital murder and sentenced to death. As the judge pronounced the sentence, he asked Andre if he had anything to say. In a quiet voice, Andre approached Laura's family and offered a brief apology. "I wish I could take it back," he said. "I'm so sorry." But his words did little to heal the wounds left by his actions. For the families of Laura, Andre Lee, and Leha, the verdict brought a measure of closure but no real comfort. "There's no justice in this," Laura's father told reporters. "We lost everything. No sentence can change that." Andre Thomas was sent to the Polunsky unit, home to Texas death row inmates. In the years that followed, his mental state continued to deteriorate. He made multiple attempts to take his own life, including the horrifying act of gouging out his remaining eye and consuming it. He claimed he did so to prevent the government from reading his thoughts. Despite his actions, Andre's mental health raised questions about his competency to face execution. Legal battles ensued, with some arguing that executing a man in such a state amounted to cruel and unusual punishment. Others contended that his crimes were too severe to warrant any leniency. Today, Andre Thomas remains on death row, isolated in darkness, his eyelids sewn shut over empty sockets. His case continues to be a grim reminder of the devastating consequences of untreated mental illness. For the town of Sherman and the families affected, the wounds left by this tragedy may never fully heal. Could this tragedy have been prevented? If Andre had received the care he needed, would Laura, Andre Lee, and Leha still be alive? These questions linger, unanswered, in the minds of all who know this story. As we reflect on this heartbreaking case, we are reminded of the fragility of the human mind and the profound need for compassion and understanding. Thank you for watching. Stay tuned for more stories that uncover the depths of the human experience. The story of Andre Thomas leaves a lasting mark, not just because of the unimaginable tragedy but because of the haunting questions it forces us to ask. How do we balance accountability and compassion? What happens when the warning signs of mental illness are ignored, leaving families, communities, and systems unprepared to respond? 3 innocent lives were taken, Laura, Andre Lee, and Leha, each full of promise, each loved deeply by their families. Their absence is a void that can never be filled. For the survivors, the pain is enduring, a daily struggle to piece together lives shattered by one horrific act. This case is more than a story of violence. It's a stark reminder of the cracks in our mental health systems, of the stigma that silences those in need, and of the devastating consequences when help comes too late. Andre's actions can never be justified, but they reveal the urgency of addressing mental illness with the seriousness it deserves. For the families of Laura and her children, justice was served in the courtroom, but no sentence can bring closure for a pain this profound. Andre Thomas remains on death row, living in darkness both figuratively and literally, haunted by the demons that consumed him and the choices he made. The question remains, could this tragedy have been prevented? If intervention had come earlier, could lives have been saved? Or was this path set long before that fateful day in March 2004? Let this story remind us of the importance of listening, noticing the signs, and reaching out when someone is struggling. Mental health is not a topic to be dismissed or ignored, it's a reality that affects us all. And in cases like this, it's clear that ignoring it comes at an unbearable cost. Perhaps one of the greatest lessons we can take from this is the power of community. Together, we can support those struggling before it's too late. The voices of those we've lost deserve to be remembered and their lives honored through action and understanding. Now, I want to hear from you. What do you think? Could this tragedy have been prevented? Do you believe mental health systems need to be reformed to prevent future losses like these? Share your thoughts in the comments below. Your voice matters, and your insights help us keep these conversations alive. Thank you for joining me on this journey through one of the most haunting cases we've ever covered. If you haven't already, don't forget to subscribe to True Crime Whispers and hit that notification bell so you never miss a story. Next time, we'll take you to another small town where a simple disappearance led to a discovery no one could have predicted. Until then, stay safe and take care of each other.